Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Second Act Actors. I'm your host, Janet McMorty, and I was and still very much am a doctor who decided to simultaneously pursue acting during a global pandemic. Why not? This is episode number 6, and I am so excited for today's episode because I have on my very first fellow doctor actor. Dr. Francesca Decker is my guest this week. She is a public health physician family doctor who moved all the way to LA to pursue a career in acting. She's a phenomenal speaker, an incredible writer, and very, very talented actress. She puts a label on something that I've been struggling with a lot during my acting career, and I know a lot of other people can relate. We doctors love to put labels on things, right? We love to diagnose. And it actually feels kind of good to have a label, to have a diagnosis, to say, yes, this is what is impairing my ability as an actor. So I'm not going to tell you what the diagnosis is because you're going to have to watch this episode. But the big thing that I find, and I know people can relate to this, right? You feel the emotions deep within you, the emotions that you're supposed to be putting on the stage, on the screen. Fear, sadness, loss, anger, stress, happiness. They're there. They're bubbling up inside, but they're not coming through on your face. I'm so excited for you to watch this episode or listen to this episode because she gets into it, and it has really, really impacted me as a doctor, as an actor, and as a human. Please enjoy Dr. Francesca Decker. You and I have never met,
right?
But I heard your podcast on the Audrey Helps Actors podcast right at that beginning of the pandemic. And
awesome.
It was so awesome. Well, the podcast was awesome. Being the pandemic was garbage, but yeah. And I thought when I was making a list of who I would ideally love to have on this to chat with, I was like, oh yes, Francesca, she had that amazing, that episode was so great. I think you brought a lot of calmness and stillness to, I think, what was a very chaotic time with a group of very chaotic entertainment industry individuals.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. I was so excited because I love Audrey's podcast. So I saw her, posting on Instagram about COVID, and she was sharing a lot of resources for actors to make money, but she wasn't sharing much about the actual information for COVID. And I was like, I'm just going to put a message and she'll probably ignore it and whatever. But I posted a message and I was like, hey, I'm a doctor and an actor and I'd be happy to talk to you about what's going on. And she replied and I was like, oh my God, Audrey replied to my message. I was so excited. I was so nervous for that interview. And I was only able to listen to it once and I kind of had to cringe throughout it. But I haven't been able, I don't think I'll ever listen to it a second time, but I do feel like there were a few things I said, because I know she was like, so we'll be back in a month or so, right? And I was like, about that. So hopefully a couple pieces that, stood the test of time reasonably well. But
yeah, I think the biggest thing that I noticed, I listened to it this morning, parts of it this morning.
Oh, wow.
The best part, well, I think that was the second or third time I'd listened to it, but the parts I really liked were, you explained science so well. And there was one part where you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I should probably dumb it down. And Audrey's like, no, keep your science brain.
Yeah, she was amazing. I had another conversation with her afterwards, and I'll probably have another one as I actually start going back to acting, which we'll talk about. But
yeah. So yeah. We could go on and on about Audrey, but tell me about yourself. You have had a fantastic career, not just in medicine, but in acting. Start from the beginning.
So I'm a family doctor. I got into medical school and I knew that I wanted to do something in addition to medicine. So I actually got into a public health program first. And I did a dual degree, MD, MPH. And public health was always something I was really passionate about. And even throughout medical school, I kept saying to my now husband, I don't know if I'm actually going to practice medicine. I'm not sure what's going to happen. We'll see. And then I found family medicine, and I loved that it was, you can do a little bit of everything, not necessarily all at the same time, but wherever your interests take you as a family doc, you can probably find a place to do it. And also from an advocacy standpoint, family docs tended to be very community oriented and, because we're looking at the family and the setting that the family is in. And so they tended to be a lot more involved and engaged, which was really appealing to me. So I went to residency at University of Rochester, and I did their political advocacy and leadership track, and I did their global health track, and I was a chief resident, and I did a little bit of research, and in my chief year and the year before, I also have always loved to write. And so one of my mentors in Rochester did a lot of narrative medicine, and my co-chief also was really into narrative medicine. And so we ended up doing some it's not quite spoken word, but we wrote stuff and then we read it and semi-performed it in front of an audience. And of course, I loved it. And I also love to teach. And as a chief resident, I got to do a lot of that. And I really studied teaching with my main advisor as a chief and the ways to teach so that people actually learn. And of course, I've always loved teaching and been sort of critical of teachers because I have always loved to perform. And so when you have a teacher who's up there just droning on and not actually engaging, I just was always very frustrated by that. But throughout medical school, my third year of medical school and residency, my mom got very sick. And I also had 3 grandparents die all within 6 months of each other. And then my mom got sick right after that. And after about a year or so, she was diagnosed with multiple system atrophy, which is this chronic neurodegenerative disease. It's brutal. And, in my chief year, which was a 4th year for me, which was nice because I've always been someone who wanted to do everything and so sometimes had difficulty making decisions about what to do. So the 4th year was nice to give me a little extra time. I talked to my stepfather and I said, Jared, he's my husband, we want to move close to you when you feel like the time is right so we can help. And he said, well, if you don't do it now, I don't think you're going to be able to. And so we moved in. We did take a really great trip first because I knew that moving back in with my mom and my stepdad was going to be intense. And I, after 4 years of residency and 4 years of medical school, needed a little bit of break. So we took a really great trip, but then we moved in with them for 6 months. And during that time, I started a blog, which was something I'd always thought about doing. And it's called A Human Doctor. And it was about taking care of my mom as a physician. And I named it A Human Doctor because I felt like as a doctor, a lot of the time, I was expected to be sort of like a robot. And as a family doctor, I was expected, and I enjoyed, talking to people about these really intense things that they'd experienced and doing mental health care. But then, whatever intense, painful things were going on in my life had to just kind of be shoved down. And if a patient was sobbing or screaming at me, I had to just kind of keep my cool. And, I couldn't respond there's a point, right? You need to be empathetic, you need to be present, but for the most part, I'm not going to be hugging my patients. And if a patient's screaming at me, I'm not going to scream back at them, So I called it A Human Doctor because I felt like I had sort of lost touch with some of my humanity. And, taking care of my mom was really confronting me with it pretty intensely. So at that point, she was pretty close to bedridden. She was in a wheelchair. She needed help with all of her, her ADLs, all of her cleaning and eating and all that kind of stuff. And we lived on the property, but not in their house. But I took care of her basically 40 to 60 hours a week during the day. And then at night, my stepdad would take care of her. We moved in with them in September of 2015, and she died March 11th of 2016. And it was shocking to me. I mean, it just went so much faster than I expected. And when she died, I was pretty gobsmacked, even though I knew it was coming. I'm a doctor, I've done end-of-life care. I like end-of-life care. I knew all these things were happening, but I still was shocked. And she was 59 when she died, she was young. Ugh. And I'm an only child, she was my person, and so losing her was really hard. And For that first month after she died, I was kind of just floating, just trying to survive. I did a bunch of gardening because I felt like something with my hands where I could rip things out and throw things was good. And I took a trip to Florida with my cousins because one of them was in a swim meet down there. And on the way down, I stopped at the airport and I bought a book called The One Thing. As I said, I've always been someone who's done a million things. And so I was like, this is interesting. Let's see what they have to say. What's the benefit of doing just one thing? And I really liked the way that they talked about the power of focus and persistence. And, Malcolm Gladwell talks about this, the concept of the 10,000 hours and all that. And I started learning about some of that as a chief. And I really, as a chief resident, just started to come to terms with the possibility of failure and realized that, like, I was somebody who had been very fortunate and not had a ton of failure growing up, which is actually not a good thing. Because then when I got to like college and med school and residency, if I failed, I just was like, oh, I guess that means I shouldn't do this thing. And in medicine, right, like failure is unacceptable. And so it was a new concept to me that like actually lots of successful, whether they're entrepreneurs or artists or clinicians, right, have had to fail in order to succeed. And so I read that book and they sort of had this question of like, what is the one thing that you could do that would make everything else either easier or unnecessary? And also, that's like the daily question, but also like, what is the one thing that you can do that, I don't remember the exact question, but it was like for your life, the one thing that you can do that only you can do that would make everything else easier. And initially I started thinking about writing, but then I kind of came to acting and I was like, if I could make it at some level as an actor. I'm not saying I've come to terms with the fact I'm not going to be Jennifer Lawrence at this point, but like if I could make it to, even a moderate level as an actor, you've got an audience that's paying attention to you. And when you're sharing information about, for example, public health issues, you have an audience, right, that you're reaching that's outside of what you would normally get if you're just a doctor or a public health advisor, right? And I felt like, well, this could give me a different platform. It's something I'd always loved to do. And frankly, kind of just got too scared to actually try it. And my mom she had studied human genetics and animal genetics and was doing her master's degree, was a computer whiz, and she was a brilliant like science and mathematical mind. And she ended up leaving all of that to pursue her passion, which was to breed, train, and show Morgan horses. And so there was definitely this part of me that was like, oh, I need to follow in my mother's footsteps, And I was reading a lot of her, she didn't write a lot of journals, but I read some of them, and I realized she was really hard on herself in a way that, as her daughter, I was really sad to read, but also was very striking because the way that she wrote about herself was so similar to the way that I have written about myself. And I was like, she would not want me to carry this, and, she'd want me to go for something that I'd be excited to do and to take that chance. She'd have been completely supportive of it. I mean, even throughout medicine, she'd be like, oh, Anne Hathaway gave a speech, and I thought about you up there. Like, she was always just kind of still like talking about it. So of course, this was a totally naive thought process about the pursuit of acting, but like, that's where you start sometimes, right? With a dream. So I started out with an acting class, which I had actually signed up for before my mom died, and then was like, well, I can't do this. And I went back to it. It was a Meisner technique program, and it just blew my mind. I mean, and I was grieving pretty heavily at that time. And, within the like third class, they had us do an exercise where you're, sitting with a partner and you're just noticing, right? And I don't even think it was necessarily, maybe we were starting to get into emotion. Have you done much with Meisner?
I've read the book, but I've never
Okay.
taken any classes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So the first part was you just sit and like say the same thing back and forth, right? And then the next step is you say things like, your shirt is blue, until you're pinched, right? To notice something else, but you're still keeping it objective. And then I think the next stage after that is starting to try to notice body language and emotion and stuff like that. And I think I think my partner made some comment about, your shirt is blue or something. And I just was like kind of paralyzed. And my teacher was like, what's going on? What's going on? And I was like, and I was like, I feel you're making me so sad. And I just started crying. And my partner was so just there with me. She just, I don't even think she did much because she wasn't really supposed to be physically interacting with me, but just like eye contact, focus, you're sad. Oh, this is a space where I can have feelings and it's okay. And not only is it okay, but like with time, I can have all sorts of really messy feelings and this person isn't going to abandon me. They're not going to run away. They're not going to tell me that I'm messed up for having these feelings. And also afterwards, it's going to be a celebration that like, oh, you had these feelings on stage and they were authentic and you connected with another person and it was amazing and powerful to witness. Once I started getting that experience, it was, I told my teacher, I wrote a post about it on my blog, but like, I felt like there were moments where being in that class felt more real than anything else that was happening in my life. Because it was just like honest connection, no bullshit. One thing that I learned during my first semester with this program was that I smile a lot when I am angry, nervous, worried. And my teacher kept being like, Francesca, you're smiling. Francesca, you're smiling. Francesca, you're smiling. And I would get so angry about it. But it was like, of course I'm smiling. As a doctor, I have to maintain my calm at all times. And also as a daughter, I sort of had to do that. That was how I found it. And I fell in love with it. I started doing plays. And by the end of 2016, I said to my husband, I was like, I really want to move to Los Angeles and I want to do this. And he had seen me focused in a way that I have, and I'm going to say this as a doctor, which is not good, but I have never been as focused as I was at that time. And so we talked about it and, it took a lot of discussion, but eventually he was like, okay, let's do it. And so 2017, I finished that Meisner program. It was a 5-semester program. I did 10 plays in 1 year, including putting together like a 2-woman show with a friend of mine. And we like picked out all the sketches and, they were short scenes and we did our own costumes and everything. And then I also did a bunch of student films. I wrote a short scene for my showcase. And and so we moved to LA in January of 2018.
Wow. That is the coolest, most heart-wrenching, lovely story. The whole time I was like, oh my God, one, selfishly, we have so much in common. Two, so much of what you said, I think just connects so many people who've done exactly what you've done. Maybe not like purely like medical school to acting like both you and I have done, but just changing from one career to another. Mm-hmm. I have so much to say. And I don't know where to start. I think the biggest thing that I got from just what you said, but also from reading your blog, was the idea of emotional restraint and how tricky that is and how that actually benefits you as a doctor, mm-hmm. but impairs you as an actor. And because you have to, like exactly what you're saying, in front of patients, you have to put on a face, a persona, an act, haha. But in front of an audience, you have to completely knock everything like that down. And that's been the hardest thing for me as well, to be like, I am sad, let me show you sad, as opposed to, I'm sad, I'm sad, I'm sad, I'm sad, let me tell you about your blood pressure medications, oh God, right?
Let me tell you how sad I am.
Right? Yeah. It's so hard to be like, I can feel sadness, think sadness, but also show sadness.
Right.
Game changer.
It is. Yeah. And I actually had my therapist at the time that I was seeing recommend, because you may share this, but like for me, crying on cue is difficult. It's not a thing that I can do easily. And I've worked really hard on it, and I've been able to do it like 5 or 6 times, which has been so exciting when it's happened.
And it's exciting, sorry to interrupt you. It's exciting that you're crying. Oh, this is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've cried a ton, but it's usually not been because I wanted to, right? Like, it's like I'm in a scene and my teacher keeps pushing and pushing, and finally, like, I'm able to have the meltdown and do the scene. But like, to get there on my own has been challenging. And one of the things my therapist recommended I do in those first months after, actually, I don't think it was right away. I think it was probably a few months after my mom died, when I was starting to do more acting. And I was like, this is a block that I have and I want to work on it. She was like, give yourself every day 10 or 15 minutes to feel your grief. Play some music, look at pictures, sit with your grief for those 10 or 15 minutes, and just allow it to be whatever it is. Don't try to force it, but just give yourself that space. And I actually felt like, as an actor, it was really helpful, but also just as a human being, to be like, okay, there's this really intense, scary thing that I feel. And if I don't make space for it, it's going to come out whenever it wants to. Whereas if I allow myself that time to have it, I have it. And I give it the space it needs. And it still might come out sometimes when I don't want to, but it's not as overwhelming when it does, because I've already looked at it. Like, I know it's there. It's not it's not a shock when it comes out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is there a guilt associated with it? Like,
with
feeling
grief?
that sad? Yeah, because my gut when you were saying that was, so just as an aside, my mom passed away when I was in my first year of residency.
Wow.
So I was like, let's talk about more things we have in common.
Yeah.
But I definitely feel, I don't know if, again, I have difficulty labeling my emotions myself personally. I can label them perfectly for patients. Let me tell you what you are. But for me, and so I don't know if what I'm labeling right now is guilt, but like that feeling of, I can't express this. I'm strong. I am confident. I excel at everything. I've never failed. Exactly what you were saying. So yeah, maybe it's not a guilt, or maybe it is like a shame of feeling that.
I think shame is part of it.
Shame? Yeah.
Yeah. And I will say, I think some of it too is like, I mean, we don't need to get too psychoanalytical about things, but like, I look back at what feedback I got about emotions as a child, and like, it was not okay for me to be angry, maybe it was kind of okay for me to be sad, but I don't think it was a thing I did very much. And that can't have been because I wasn't sad. Right. So like, yes. I think, I'm an only child. I was an only grandchild. I am such a perfectionist. I was voted class perfectionist, right? Like, to be that perfect person, you can't have these messy emotions. So absolutely, I think shame is a huge part of it. And also fear of like, if I actually have those feelings, what happens? Do they stop? Do they just totally overwhelm me? Does it ruin my day? Does it ruin my week if I open up this box of something that's painful? I had a teacher in LA. I was so fortunate. I studied with some really amazing schools in LA, and that's one huge perk of being a doctor. And I wasn't practicing while I was there, but my husband's a doctor. So between the two of us, we had enough money that like I could afford to take classes at some of the best places. Yeah, I was at Margie Haber with Diane Charles, who does like the intermediate level courses there. And she, we talked a lot. It was a great class. It was like a really vulnerable, it's so nice. It's like so much of acting is like, let's talk about our feelings and like, why are we vulnerable? Why aren't we vulnerable? And like, let's just break down in front of each other. It's like, whew. And they always say like, if you need therapy, get therapy. But like, let's be honest, there is something very therapeutic about being able to do that in front of other people and like have it be okay. But she talked a lot about when we needed to have those scary feelings in a scene. She was like, picture that little inner child. She was also a therapist. She was like, picture your inner child who is the one that's scared of doing this thing, right? And like take a moment where you take your child's hand and you're like, okay, this is going to be like a roller coaster. We're going to go down these stairs into this kind of scary place, but we're doing it because actually it kind of feels good, even though it's scary. And then we're going to come back out the steps afterward, and it's going to be okay. Like, we don't have to stay down in it, you know? And it was just like actually very helpful for me anyway, that visualization. So yeah, and I actually randomly was talking to a friend recently who was like, oh, you know, I realized I needed to reconnect with my inner child. And as she said that, I got really sort of teary-eyed, and I was like, oh, I actively did that when I started acting again. You know, emotional preparation for Meisner, you like do a lot of sort of visualization of different types of experiences and moments where you have different feelings. And so there was stuff there that I did around like little 4-year-old Chessie, right? Like that was my nickname as a kid. I found it really helpful, like it to connect to that playful, vulnerable part of myself. And when she said that to me, I realized, so when COVID hit, my stepfather had actually died 3 months before COVID hit, which was really devastating.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And then COVID hit, and right before, on March 9th of 2020, which is my husband's and my anniversary, we'd gone out for lunch, we'd gone to a movie, and I had told my agent and my manager, I'd signed with a new manager who was already getting me auditions like twice a week. I was so excited. I wasn't pregnant. I wasn't breastfeeding. I was like, all right, 2020 is my year. I'm going to go all in on acting. I am ready. On March 9th, I said this. So, life. And then as COVID, like as it became clear that we were not going to get a handle on it and it was not going to get better anytime in the near future, I started to think about my daughter and our family, all of our families on the East Coast. And I was really worried that they weren't all going to make it through COVID. My grandfather actually died, not from COVID, but he died that summer before we got back here. And so, you know, I felt we'd always sort of thought we would come back to the East Coast, but I felt like we needed to do it sooner rather than later. But I realized in talking to my friend about the inner child the other day, I think in making that decision, I kind of just shut the door on my inner child, and I haven't looked at her since. And so when my friend brought that up, I was like, oh, right. That like playful, vulnerable human part of me is just, she's been hibernating. So I'm excited to, you know, we're planning to move down near New York City this year. I'm really looking forward to like reconnecting with her a little bit and giving this acting thing another shot, you know, in a new place. But it's a little scary, but I'm excited.
That's great. Just took a pandemic to go shift.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I did start practicing again, so that was one good thing. You know, when COVID hit, I was like, I'm a doctor with a MPH. This isn't the time for me to be acting, right? I need to be helping.
Feel that guilt.
Oh, yeah. It was big.
Need to help.
Big guilt. Yes, my job to save the world. Absolutely. So, you know, I tried, and that's fine. I've started practicing again, which is good. And I'm hoping that, like, I was thinking about it, you know, so if medicine was the first act and moving to LA to act was the second act, this is either like an intermission or a third act to like transition into the fourth act.
Nice.
Which is where I'm actually able to like do all of it, I'm hoping. Practice medicine, write, teach, you know, and also act. And I don't know if it's going to be possible, but that's my hope, is that I can find a way to do all the things. And mom. I have to mom too.
And mom. Do you find with your perfectionism that most doctors I know have, because that's what keeps patients alive?
Right.
How do you feel? Because, you know, when you were just chatting there, so much about your life in medicine is so different from the acting part, right? Like, oh, here was my box of medicine, but I needed that box of acting to get out of that box of medicine. Is there anything that you found that you were able to bring in from your medical career that was an advantage for you in acting?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a family doctor, I had training in like psychosocial medicine. So I had some like psychology, psychoanalysis type of training. And so I definitely, like you said, right? Like I'm very good at reading other people's emotions. Mm-hmm. And I'm good at identifying them and you know, I don't know what the right way is to say it. Like I'll have a reaction whether or not I allow myself to show the reaction. Right. So I think that like the ability to connect, and also as a doctor being a very good listener, right? And like, so those were things that I think were helpful. Like I said, every acting class I took, maybe not everyone, but many of them would get into these intense conversations about feelings and mental health. And there's so much overlap between those things. And so I was often sort of like the mother hen that was sort of either initiating or helping to sort of move the conversation along, not necessarily leading it every time, but just like having that background definitely gave me a lot of insight to share with all the people who are half my age who are in this industry and trying to navigate what can be just, it's hard. It is really hard.
Yeah. And I think also it's not only your career, but your life experiences for sure, right? You've lived a life that, I've said this 50 times in this podcast. No offense to these people who are fresh out of theater school. I mean, like I keep saying, I'm a little jealous of them. But you know, you've lived a life and had life experiences, you've had trauma. I remember being in an acting class and feeling selfish for pulling some of the grief that I felt from when my mom passed away and being like, oh, I'm using that to further my acting career. I remember my teacher being like, no, that is your story. That's your life, right? That's part. And same with you, right? Of course, you're going to mother hen these people because you've lived this and you want them to be like, either one, do what I did or don't do what I did. Let me tell you.
Yeah. And I also think being a little bit older, I will say being pregnant in LA pursuing acting was really hard. It was the plan. I was on board with it. It was what I wanted. I didn't anticipate how hard it was going to be to see my body transform in ways that I had no expectation or control over. And to do that in like an image-based, while starting in an image-based industry in a very image-oriented town was really, really hard. But with that being said, I went there knowing that like that's what it was going to be. And I had more, I think just a little bit more comfort with, okay, I am who I am. I'm not saying it didn't sting sometimes. I'm not saying it wasn't hard, but like, you know, at this point, I'm a little bit more comfortable in my own skin. I'm a lot more comfortable in my skin than I was 10 or 15 years ago. And that reads when you go into an audition. You know, they want people who are comfortable with who they are because that's who they're casting. And so if you come in looking one way and, you know, they cast you another way and you can't make peace with that, that's going to make it hard for you to move forward and be successful. Yeah. So I think there was some help on that end as well.
Absolutely. And especially in an industry where we as women are not allowed to age in North America, right? In the UK you can, but yeah. And was that a big surprise? Was that pretty LA focused, do you think? Like, or did you notice that when you were doing your stage work before you moved?
Well, it's hard. It's, you know, it's apples and oranges, right? I was in a tiny market doing amateur theater and amateur, you know, student films. One of my favorite resources, other than Audrey, is Bonnie Gillespie. Have you read her stuff or looked at her stuff?
Okay, why is that name triggering in my brain?
She does self-management for actors. That's her.
Maybe. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, if you have never read her book, you must read her book, and you definitely should check out her stuff. She's gotten a lot more into astrology lately. So, I think for some people that's a great fit. For other people, it's not. But she's a casting director who has been in the industry for, I think, like 20 years at this point. And she really writes to like it's self-management for actors, right? It's all about like you taking charge of your acting career. And part of that is knowing what your brand is and doing the work to figure out what your brand is and making peace with your brand. She talks a ton about actor mindset and like mental health and enoughness. But then also about how to get all your tools together, researching agents and casting directors and managers so that you're finding the people that they're going to be excited to have you, right? Her stuff is just, as a person who like had no idea how the industry works, I found her book, and then I did her like Get in Gear for the Next Tier program. I found those super helpful. And she talks about the difference between like a minor market and a major market. And basically in a minor market, you can play anything because there's not that many people. I played like, like this old woman who went around and like killed this guy, right? I played the Wicked Witch of the West on stage, which was like one of my all-time favorite roles that I have done or ever will do. I was in Skin of Our Teeth, and I played the like, I think she's like 8, like this 8-year-old girl. So like the breadth of what you get to do in a minor market is just so much bigger. When you get to a major market, the major market of LA, you need to like get so laser focused on what your brand is. And Audrey talks about that too. And it was weird for me because before having a child, I sort of passed for being in like my high 20s, maybe early 30s. But that was actually kind of hard because there were a lot of women who sort of look like me who are in that age group and who have a ton more acting experience than I have, right? And so I can do some of the like lower tier stuff because a lot of those women have already moved up. They've done the lower tier. They've moved ahead in their acting career. But it was just kind of a weird space because of how I looked versus like who I actually was. Now that I've had a kid, having a kid ages you a little bit, whether you like it or not. And I'm going to tell you this because this isn't airing for like another 3 or 4 months, right?
Correct.
So I'm pregnant with my second child right now.
Wait, hold on. Medical training coming in. Are we excited about this?
We are, yes. I wouldn't have told you. If I wasn't.
I just remember learning that in medical school. It's like always ask if they're happy about it first before you say congratulations.
Definitely.
Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you. But it's still, it's still hard. But part of what I said to it's just hard for me when my body does this. But I did say to my husband, I was like, I wanted to do it this year. So that like we move and I'm not pregnant, or maybe I'm only a little pregnant for a little bit. And then like the breastfeeding thing was the whole thing. And so like hoping that after like that first year of being in our new place, I can start going again because, it does kind of blow up your life a little bit having a kid. I liked to convince myself that it wouldn't, but it totally does. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it will be different in New York from LA, but LA definitely is, the Super Bowl of acting. And so, if you're a pregnant woman, then that's what you're doing. You're being a pregnant woman. And
that's your role.
That is. And my big break in LA was that I booked a compression sock commercial when I was 38 weeks pregnant.
Fantastic.
I am still non-union, and it was a non-union commercial, but that commercial gets aired in like every hospital. It gets aired at like 2:00 in the morning. So it is the thing I have gotten the most like messages. People are like, "Oh, I saw your commercial."
That is fantastic.
Yeah. It was fun though. It was a lot of fun. I remember I posted on my Instagram about it because like, they had all the different clothes for me and everything. And then the thing that got me was I was sweating because, you're under the lights and I was nervous or whatever. And they had somebody who came over. Right, exactly. 38 weeks pregnant. Yeah. I had somebody come over with a hairdryer, blow drying my armpits. And I was like, I have made it.
The best job.
I have made it.
It's like the equivalent of like fanning Cleopatra. It's amazing.
I was like, you don't have to do that. He's like, no, it's fine. This is my job. Because you can't have sweat stains on camera. Like,
No.
okay.
That's
Go for
amazing.
it. Thank you.
That is fantastic.
It was great.
Is there anything that's really, well, besides the news you just gave, but is there anything that's getting you excited for the year to come? I'm in Toronto, probably very similar market to New York in the fact that you're competing against the most beautiful people in the world, Los Angeles, who it's beautiful and sunny all the time and everyone's sun goddess, and we're like minus 30 and cold and gray and I'm just pastel. Anyways, how can we compete against these people? I think that's what New York is probably kind of like. But is there anything that you're getting excited about for the year 2022, which will be your year? Screw you, 2020.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so 2022, the weather here has also been terrible. I'm in Ithaca, New York. It is known to be cold and snowy anywhere from October to May, basically.
Us too.
Yeah, it was 5 degrees this morning when I took my daughter to daycare. I was like,
oh, what is that in normal human speak? Celsius, what is that? Minus something.
Yeah.
No, I think it's like minus 20 or something like that. Like that's really cold.
You're asking me a hard question that I don't know the answer to.
It's okay. It's cold. It's cold here too.
It was cold. It was really unpleasant. So about a week or so ago, it was snowing. It's been snowing all month. And, last year we moved back here and we got a 3-foot dump of snow all at one time. I think that's around a meter, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
The one thing we understand in the rest of the world is height and weight being feet and inches and pounds. Like if you ask me what my weight is in kilos or my height is in meters, I'm like, I have no idea. Anyways, yes, a meter. That's a lot of snow.
It was a lot of snow. But we'd just come from LA and it was all at once. And there were a couple other big snows, but it didn't feel like it was snowing all the time. This winter, it's been snowing a lot, frequently. And I just have been longing for Los Angeles. And so about 2 weeks ago, I texted my husband and I was like, we need to go somewhere sunny or I'm going to lose my mind. Between COVID and being pregnant and being in the Northeast, we haven't really been seeing very many people. We haven't been doing very many things. The things that we love to do together were go to movies, go out to dinner, have people over. We like to entertain. Yeah. So we bought tickets to Puerto Rico and we're going in a couple of weeks and I am extremely excited.
Oh, that'll be amazing.
Yeah. And we're going to buckle down before we go so we don't get COVID before we go. And we'll do N95s on the plane. And they do a lot of masking there. We're still going to do our best to be safe with everything because, we're doctors and I'm pregnant. Yeah. But mental health sometimes has to play an important role. And we are very privileged and fortunate that we are able to do this. And it's sort of our baby moon too, because, we're not taking her with us. She's going to stay here and we're going to go.
Just have some time. Yeah. You and your spouse.
Yeah.
It sounds like you have a really wonderful support system.
Yeah.
Which is just wonderful.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think for some of my family, it's been hard, especially having me move far away was hard. But they've all understood it for sure and been supportive of it. My husband has been awesome. He has been. And I get tired of saying that because everyone's like, oh, your husband's so amazing. But we work really hard on our marriage, and we have a lot of conversations. And when I got pregnant the first time, I sort of said to him, I was like, I'm really nervous that this is going to mean that anytime our child is sick, I'm the one that's going to have to stay home because I'm acting and it's not as important as doctoring. And that was part of why we had our daughter in daycare, because I was like, even though I wasn't making money as an actor, I was going to classes, I was getting auditions, and that's what it is for those first years. And, if I had to stay home with her, which I did sometimes, but if I'd had to do it all the time, it would have just been a lot harder. And a lot of people do that. A lot of people don't have kids, which was what I realized when I went to LA. It was like, oh, they have dogs. They have dogs instead of children because children mess everything up in the most wonderful way, but they do mess everything up. But no, I mean, there was one audition that I had, and actually, I think it was a callback. And so I was really excited about it. And our daughter had to stay home because she was sick. And my husband, like we talked about it, and he's a hospitalist. So for anybody who doesn't know, that means he works in the hospital only. He doesn't have clinic patients. And it means that like he has to round and see all the patients in the morning, and then he has to be around for the rest of the day for things that come up. And most of the time he's sitting at a computer in the afternoon, putting in orders, looking at imaging, whatever. But so there's a little flexibility after he's seen his patients. And so he actually came home for like an hour in the middle of the day, and he watched her so that I could go to my audition. And, awesome. It was great. And also, like, if the roles were switched, I think I would do the same for him. But yeah, I mean, that was important to me in a partner, to have someone that like was going to really be equal on these things.
I love what you just said there. That really ties into, there is that weird mindset, right? I think everything in acting is so high stakes for the way you're supposed to act in the scene, right? You're supposed to bring in the stakes, the higher the stakes, the higher the stakes. But it's not real life. It's not that high stakes when it's compared to what we do for a living in our doctor jobs. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's this weird disconnect between doctor... Mm-hmm. Actor is not as important. Right. And I think that brings in, I know, some guilt for me as well, for sure. I mean, my husband is a ICU doctor, but I love what you just said about if the roles were reversed, right? Like if he was the one pursuing acting and I was the one doing the doctoring still, which I still am simultaneously doing it, 100% there would be the support there. Yeah. I'm rambling, but I love what you just said there. I love what you just said.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting. I don't know if this is true for you, but one of the questions you had sort of sent me ahead of time was what was the biggest surprise about acting? One of the things that I was surprised about when I started really looking at acting as like a professional option is that A, you need to make yourself extremely available, and B, you cannot cancel once you've booked something, right? Yeah. Like, because there is no if then to acting, there is no if you do this, then you get that. Your reputation is one of the most important things you have, and the relationships that you have. At least this is what I've heard and how it seems to me. And so like, if I don't have my act together, but like if I don't have my shit together, right? And I say I'm available for something, and then either I'm wrong and I'm working that day, or, and this is where for me as a parent, I get freaked out, my kid is sick. And I don't have someone to take care of her. Yeah. That feels like it's a really big problem. And while that's true in medicine too, right? Like I remember my friends in residency who would like go to work with an IV, like give themselves a liter of fluid because they were so sick and they didn't think that they could go home. And COVID has certainly like just pulled the sheet back on all of that. But in some ways, I'm a little more comfortable saying, oh, I can't come in today to see my patients, as long as like there's not going to be a life or death thing there, than I would be to say, oh, I can't come in for this thing that I've booked, right? Which is crazy on the one hand, because it's like, it is life or death versus not. But it's just what the importance is of that one day is totally different. Because if that one day was your first whatever and you can't be there, that sucks. And like it could really harm you. So that was,
can't reschedule. Yeah.
I think people can be understanding of having kids, and I'd like to think that is starting to shift in the industry, but it's still kind of, that's still a thing that I don't see as much about, right? Like that's still a thing that I don't think there's as much discussion around. And even just when you look at the stories that are being told, like The Lost Daughter, I'm going to do a spoiler, but there's this moment where, Olivia Colman confesses, quote unquote, that she left her children for a couple of years. And this other character asks her what it was like. And as she said it, I said it. Amazing. Yeah, of course it was. There's no question in my mind that it could have been difficult and also completely amazing. But I think like those kinds of stories of like parenting and motherhood and being a whole complete human being after you have a child, especially as a woman, those are just starting to come out. There's only a few shows and movies that I've seen that really try to take that on. And I think to some extent in the industry, I mean, I'm still so low down on a totem pole that I have a lot of concern about that, right? Like, I don't want to assume that if my kid has to stay home, I'll just bring her on set with me and it'll be fine. Like,
right. Or they'll rearrange it. It's okay.
Oh, totally.
We'll reschedule
it's
for
fine.
the next day.
Yeah. Not a big deal at all. I'm not costing them thousands of dollars, right? Like, it's just, it's an interesting... So there's stuff there with the entertainment industry that I'm still trying to understand and that I think is still, I don't know how much it's shifting, but I think it's shifting a little bit. Whereas with medicine, especially family medicine, right? Like there's much more awareness and acceptance and understanding that like, this is part of what happens. Yeah. Breastfeeding is another place. I'll just put one last thing out there about that.
Yeah.
So I did some background work, which was super fun. And like, I got to, it was just, I got to see some of my favorite actors and like be, in a scene with them. So I did this one sitcom and I needed to pump. And I like run up to the PA who's, 18. And I'm like, so I'm breastfeeding and I need to go pump. I need to go like, take care of that. And they're just kind of like, okay, that should be fine. I run out to the parking garage and I like plug my little pump in and I'm just sitting there like, okay, here I go for half an hour pumping in this random parking garage. And I'm kind of sitting there. And then this like guy walks up to the car and he's like knocking on the window trying to talk to me. And I'm like, oh my God, what's happening? And he's like asking me some question. And I just was like, I don't know, go away. It's just like, I can't stop every however many hours to pump when I'm doing background, right? Like I'm not important enough on background to be like, excuse me, I need a break. Whereas in medicine, now granted, I'm more important in medicine than I am as a background actor. It's built in. I have that protection. Of course, I can have the time to go and do that if it's something I need. So it's been very interesting, just like being part of and exploring these two completely different worlds, and then adding like new motherhood into that as well.
Yeah, new motherhood, new city. Right. New job. That's incredible. Yeah. That's incredible. And in a city that, like you were saying, everyone has dogs. No one has babies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm so excited for you to, well, this sounds so patronizing what's coming out of my mouth. I'm so excited for you to get back into acting. I did not mean for that to be so patronizing, but
no,
that's really cool. I remember when God bless my dad, when I was kind of feeling pretty burnt out during peak COVID times.
Oh yeah.
And was ranting to my dad about the state of the world and state of medicine and blah, blah, blah. And he goes, oh, you're not journaling anymore, are you? You're not writing stuff down. And I was like, oh, you're right. Yeah. Because I thought I need to be doing the doctor thing right now and everything else is secondary.
Yeah.
But then that harms the doctor thing.
Totally. Yeah. I felt like when the year before I moved to LA, I was practicing medicine 3 days a week, doing student health, I'm doing student health part-time now. Mm-hmm. And then, like I said, I was doing a ton of other acting stuff. And I was so much happier as a doctor because I wasn't completely buried in medicine. And I actually was doing something else that was just for me because I loved it, right? And so that was really informative too. And I've really gotten into I am big on the self-care bandwagon at this point. And for physicians especially, for healthcare providers, right? Across the spectrum in healthcare, that self-care thing. A lot of us weren't doing it this past 2 years, and we're seeing the fallout of it now. And
absolutely.
Yeah. fine. When my therapists have been like, so tell me what comes up when we talk about acting, I just start like sobbing. So like, okay, this is the thing I need to get back to. And now that like I've been practicing again, and I also am doing some public health stuff, and I'm writing, I did this Harvard Media and Medicine program, which was really cool and might be something you'd want to check out as well.
Cool.
So like, I'm trying to find my way to like have all this balance, right? Of all these different things that I love doing. And I think there is some truth in like, if you want to be Jennifer Lawrence, you probably do need to have both feet in one bucket. That's not the only way that you can be an actor. And depending what your interest is and depending on what feeds you, you can still be an actor who makes money and gets on TV or film and has a rewarding career as an actor. And you may not be that person that the paparazzi is watching outside, but that might actually be good, and also be able to do other things if that's what works for you. This is what I'm telling myself, so I'm hoping that it's true.
I think that's 100% true, right? It's changing your mindset, right? Yeah. I mean, into what, like, and goal setting and finding what serves you and going down those lanes and focusing on that as opposed to just kind of pick from all over the place. It's streamlining. That's the word I'm looking for. Is there anything else you want to add? Words of wisdom? This has been like an hour of words of wisdom. Holy crow.
Oh boy. Trying to think if there was anything else as I was thinking about this. No, boy, I better be really wise now.
Right? Give me the wisest words of wisdom you have.
Pregnancy is a time where I think women are often kind of invisible, which is funny because they're so visible, right? I was told when I was pregnant in LA that, and I was taking a class in comedy, and I was told, well, when you're pregnant, you can be as sexy as you want, and it's funny because pregnant women aren't sexy. And I was like, ouch.
Whoa.
Yeah. But it's kind of true, right? Like when you think about the way pregnancy is portrayed, like it's never portrayed as sexy. And I've talked to my husband recently about like, when I personally am pregnant, it's this really weird experience where I just feel very disconnected from what's happening physically to like what I'm used to in my brain. And I realized some of it is feeling kind of powerless. And I in thinking about that and like what makes me feel powerful, I realized acting was a space, particularly being on stage, where I just, God, right? Like it's powerful, but in like the best way. Like, you're there and you're there because you want to be, and all eyes are on you, and you get to be a different person. You get to have all these feelings. You get to move people. You get to help people, right? Like, if anything that the pandemic has shown, it's the importance of of art for survival. I mean, I just, I think that acting is a thing that can be very empowering and very powerful.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Second Act Actors, and thank you, Francesca, for being my guest this week. Everyone, check out her blog, A Human Doctor. She's an incredible writer, and she writes more in depth about all the issues and all the things we were discussing in this episode. Also, I have a little favor to ask of everybody. If you could, write a comment, like, and subscribe this podcast. What it does is I have found out there's an algorithm. What this does to help feed the algorithm monster is it helps other people find this podcast if there's more likes and subscribes and comments. That would be really helpful because it helps get the word out, helps other actors, helps other second act actors. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Thank you again to Francesca, and I hope you'll tune in next week for another episode of Second Act Actors. Second Act Actors is produced and edited by me, Janet McMorty. Theme music by Guillaume, additional sound editing by David Studio, additional video editing by Jackie Wadoer, show notes written by Sarah Hopkinson. I record using Riverside FM. If you're interested in developing an interview-based webcast like mine, I highly recommend this platform. Shoot me an email and I'll direct you to the wonderful folks there. If If you or someone you know is interested in being a guest, email me at secondactactors@gmail.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. My love language is words of affirmation, so compliments, constructive criticism, and feedback are always welcome and encouraged. Negative Nancys, Judgy McJudgersons, or Debbie Downers, unless you're Rachel Dratch, regarding me or my guests are not welcome. It takes serious courage to share your story with the world, so if you're tempted to negatively comment about someone else's story, please ask your therapist why you're such a garbage person. Save the drama for the stage. On that happy note, I hope you'll tune in next week for another episode of Second Act Actors. Bye!